I'm now going to hand over to Andrew Erkins. So it's good to bring the finance guy in early. These guys have got their challenges in the way they're running their finance. So we're bringing someone like Andrew in really early so he can be working on that sort of thing in the background to prepare that business for the relaunch and reinventing themselves in the way they do everything. Andrew.
And thanks very much for the introduction. So one of the first things that we do when we're dealing with a new business is to sit down and do a bit of a discovery. So we're looking to understand what their needs are with the business. And so thankfully I managed to sit down with Ethan and Ethel, and this is what they told me. We're using a desktop version of MYOB. We have a bookkeeper who comes in twice a week to enter sales, make payments and do payroll. They reconcile our accounts at the end of each month. We get a management report but rarely look at it. We're not financial people. Now, this is usually the starting point of when businesses first talk to us, and this is fairly common in what we see. And I know we have a lot of really switched on, future forward people here today, so I was hoping that some of you can tell me what's wrong with this picture.
All of it.
All of it? All right. What specific things do you think could be improved? There are probably about 5 things. Yep.
The desktop is just where you are, it's not online, so you can access it wherever you are.
Yeah, very good. So they're using desktop-based software. Yep. What else?
They're not looking at their financials regularly.
That's the biggest one, isn't it? That's a huge one. Suze, did you have one? Same one? Yeah. Cool. Yep. Craig?
Manually entering data.
Yeah, well, that's right. The manual entering data. So the manual entering data, they're using desktop-based software. They're not looking at their financials. 3 of 5, that's pretty good. I'll run with that. It was actually a bit of a trick question. There is nothing wrong with that picture. For a lot of businesses, that's how they operate. That's how they've always operated, and that works for them with where they're at. Now, one of the challenges, though, is if you're looking to grow, these sorts of things can be what stops you from being able to scale, right? So in a lot of ways, what stops people scaling is really not having a good understanding of their financials, their figures, their numbers, and having a lot of inefficient processes within the business. Inefficient processes might come from having a lot of manual tasks that are done day to day, having silos within the business where they might have all their accounting information is not really talking to their other systems, so they might have point of sale systems or inventory management that are all separate. And so these things can really stop people from growing, and the last thing that really stops people is the attitude of, this is just how we've always done it. And I've got a bit of a story about that. I won't name the bank, but it's a fairly large bank here in WA, and they've got a continual improvement team that goes within the business to be able to look at continual improvement. They're always looking to improve their processes and how they do things. And there was a particular challenge that they had within the bank. And this challenge was that when people apply for new mortgages, the applications would come into one department. At the end of the day, they'd go into an inbox. Then they'd go across to another department that was a couple of 100 metres away. And then they'd be processed, then be stuck in an inbox. Then we'd move back to the first department once it's been approved. And this process would take 2 to 3 days to complete. And so this team came in and said, why do you guys do things this way? And they said, this is just how we've always done it. And so what do you think the solution was to be able to fix that particular challenge?
Change their behaviours. That's the solution.
Yep, they did that. What they did is they moved the 2 departments right next to each other. So they're just on other sides of the building. They moved these departments next to each other. So instead of things going into an inbox and then being moved at the end of each day, they had the ability to just go across the room and hand something to someone, and the process that took 2 to 3 days to complete now took a couple of hours to complete. Simple things.
And that department was in India, wasn't it?
No, it wasn't. But I can see where you're heading with that. And so that's the thing, is that quite often people do things the way they've always done them. And so that really leads me onto things, is you can keep doing things the way you've always done them, or you can look for new and improved ways. And I always think that technology is a good starting point for transforming a business. A lot of people might have used desktop platforms in the past, but there are a lot better technology and ways to do things these days. And I always think that one of the central starting points for any business is looking at their accounting platform. There are a lot of really good cloud-based modern accounting platforms these days that help you run more efficiently. And if you're going to move to a cloud-based accounting platform, here are some of the benefits that you have from doing that. You can access it anytime, anywhere online. So you can log in, see the state of your accounts at any point in time. You get access to real-time information because a lot of the processes are being run more regularly. You have bank feeds and things that enable you to keep the accounts up to date more frequently. There's a whole concept of the single ledger as well, which Xero, if you're familiar with Xero, is very strong on. The idea that you can have a bunch of people collaborating on the one set of books at the same time. So rather than in the old days, you'd take a backup of a file, give it to the accountant would do his stuff for the year end, give the file back, you make adjustments in your file, and away you go. So everyone can work and advise the business a lot more frequently than what they could before. They're designed for efficiency. So they have things like bank rules, the ability to set up repeating invoices, global search, a lot of functions to help you run more efficiently. And probably my favourite thing, having a tech background, is the fact that they have an open API. And this becomes really important if you're looking at building a business system using different products that could all talk to one another, removing those inefficient processes. So I always think this is the starting point for a lot of businesses, even though they might have always been doing things the same way. It is a good starting point for businesses to modernise the way in which they operate. Now, we have a specific process that we follow when working with new businesses, and I figure it'd be a good thing to run through with you guys because it's useful to know if you're going to implement any systems change within your business. So the first thing we do is we review where people are at today. What's their current state? What's their baseline? We're looking to understand things on our side of things like what are their workflows for payables, for receivables, for payroll, what is their reporting like, what are they looking at. We have a look at their balance sheet, the P&L, the state of their accounts at a point in time. And we do it for a couple of reasons. The first reason is that we like to understand exactly where they're at, and this becomes important later on down the line. If you're looking to institute change within a business, it becomes easier to explain to people the new ways of doing things when you can frame things in terms of how they used to do it. This is what you used to do, this is what you're doing now. The other reason why we do that is to get a bit of an understanding as to how they're using their accounts, to understand the business. We also look at best practices. So sometimes what they're doing is actually really good. They might already be on a cloud platform. And all they really need are a few suggestions as to best practices. It's one of those things, as a digital bookkeeping and accounting business ourselves, we're always in the software, we're always learning what's new. And I'm sure you all, things change really rapidly as well. I'm sure you've logged into a platform in the past and they've just got an update and everything's changed. You don't know where the buttons are anymore. Yeah? So that we always start off with a review. Now, a lot of people first talk to us talking about their accounting side of things and the way in which they manage their accounts, but really that's not where things should end. It's always really important to look at the bigger picture. So while people like Ethan and Ethel might have spoken to us about the current state of their accounting, there are other systems that they use, aren't there, that are really important to be able to keep in mind that might be impacted if we say migrate them to another accounting platform. There might be an impact on their point of sale system, on the way in which they're selling things online. There are things that we need to know. We also need to know what their plans are for the future, because there's no point implementing a new system if what you're going to implement is going to be redundant within 6 months. We know these guys want to expand nationally, so we need to make sure that the systems that get put in place can support that. And there's also some timing issues. There's a good time and a less good time to migrate accounts. Does anyone know the best time to move accounts or move accounting platforms?
It'll never happen.
When's the best time?
July,
end of financial year?
or after the end of
Yeah. End of financial year is great because you get an audited set of accounts from the accountant that provides you with a closing balance from the previous year, which uses the opening balance for the next year. It's really clean cut over. That's the best time. And then there's the next best time, which is probably after. That's right down the end. The next best time is really end of quarter, so after a BAS. You've done a GST reconciliation, a bank reconciliation. You're fairly confident in the numbers at that point to be able to migrate across. After that, end of month, you closed off the month. You're fairly confident in the numbers again. After that, you're kind of dodging payroll. So you're trying to schedule it in a way that gives you the most amount of time to get the account set up before you have to pay people. And then after that, we'll just make it work. But it's important to understand the timing issues when you're looking to migrate. Well, that goes for any platform, really. Now, this tip, implement one thing at a time. the number of times you see people try and do a cold hard cut and roll everything out at the same time, and the more systems you're juggling, the more likely it is that you're going to encounter issues along the way. So if you're trying to implement a Shopify integration with Xero, which is integrated with Stripe and all of these moving parts, the integrations don't always work smoothly. And for anyone that's been involved in making a migration to cloud-based products in the past, the integrations all work in slightly different ways, and there are lots of traps and things that can make things go a bit skew if you're not on top of it all. So it's always good to stage a rollout. So implement things one step at a time, one platform at a time, get it up and running, bed it down, then move on to the next. And the last thing is manage the change, probably the most self-explanatory one. So there are a lot of change management models out there that you guys might be aware of, but they mostly have one key thing in common. Two key things in common. One is involve all the stakeholders. So everybody who's going to be involved in that touches the system in some way should be involved in having a say, and you should communicate frequently in terms of keeping them up to date as to how it's going. Something that we do with a lot of businesses that we include when we're doing a conversion is training. Really important to do training straight after when you've moved people across to a new system. It helps people, it reduces the friction, so it helps people become familiar with a new way of doing things, and that sort of harks back to where I started in terms of mapping what the old way of doing things was and what the new way of doing things is. So you can train people. And the other thing we also do is provide ongoing support. So for a period of months after we've done a conversion, we provide support to people, because a lot of the time the questions they have don't come up during the training. They normally come up once they've started using the system and hit a wall. You know, they're stuck and wondering, what do I do next? So it's always important to provide support for a period of time afterwards. So we sat down, we did the MyOp conversion with Ethan and Ethel, we provided training to the bookkeeper, and this is where they're at now. So we're now using Xero. Our bookkeeper logs in, so they still have the same bookkeeper. Our bookkeeper logs in daily to reconcile our accounts, enter sales, make payments and do payroll. They love it. Xero is simple enough that we can see how the business is performing. Oh, and we got rid of paper receipts. To me, that's a job well done. And it's probably a good time to start looking at the brand.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrew.